So thank you for joining us and welcome.
So welcome. I'm delighted to be here.
And I'm happy to talk to Marilyn Alverio, who's been the key organizer for the Latinas and Power Symposium for more than 2 decades, right?
Actually, with the Latinas and Power Symposium, I am the founder and creator and producer and everything else that goes along when you start up any kind of a network or an organization. So we are in our 21st year. And we have beyond expectations in terms of the kind of audience that is attracted to what we are talking about, the conversations that we're having. So we're very fortunate that we have been around this long and we continue to grow.
So I want to ask you a couple questions. We're going to begin first with some questions about your background, family background, and then we'll shift to some questions around civic engagement. Because I see your work organizing women, working with women as a form of civic engagement that's really valuable and important, not just for Puerto Ricans and Latinos, but also for Puerto Rican and Latino women in particular. So can you talk to me let's begin talking about your family background. Where do you come from and what is your relationship to Connecticut?
Wow. Well, I am born and raised in Connecticut. My parents came from Puerto Rico in the very early 1950s. I was born in Meriden, and after about 4 years, my parents moved to New Britain, Connecticut, which is where I was raised. But they came to the United States like many other families to look for opportunities for their children. And my father is from San Lorenzo, Cerro Gordo, and is the barrio, and my mother is from Comerío, Cedrito. Cedrita is the barrio that she came from. And, they came to the United States without an education. My mother had a 3rd grade education. My father had a 5th grade education. So when they came here, the opportunities and the jobs that were available were very labor intensive. My mother didn't work in the beginning. She was raising the children. My father worked in factories, but he was very entrepreneurial. And so when we moved to New Britain, there was several other Puerto Rican families there. There was about 10 intact Puerto Rican families. And we established the Puerto Rican community in New Britain. He had a restaurant, he had a bar called the Hudson, and then he also worked in the factory. So these families, that is really how I live in 2 worlds. I live in my Puerto Rican culture world, con un orgullo bien fuerte, and I live in my American world. And that is because of how we were raised to really be a part of what being Puerto Rican is all about. They established the Puerto Rican Society Club of New Britain, and that is really where we cut our teeth on civic engagement, which is what it's referred to today. During those days, it was siempre se le tiene que ayudar a la comunidad. Always have to help the community, bring community together. And, without knowing what this group of Puerto Rican families did is to establish our identity in a way that went against stereotypes and went against a lot of the assumptions that were made about Puerto Ricans, because we were all working class, we were all contributing to the community and to society. And not only that, we had created an inclusive environment where in our community in New Britain, it was made up of primarily African-American, Black, Italian, Polish, and Puerto Rican. And at the Puerto Rican Society Club, everyone was welcome and they would come. But when I say we cut our teeth on that experience is watching our parents and promoting our culture and promoting our language. I ended up being a salsera because music is in my blood as a result of what I grew up with. Being able to speak Spanish fluently is something that, they shared with us. we didn't experience what many second generation Puerto Ricans and Latinos experience, in that their parents didn't want them to speak Spanish because, it was going to put a target on them. In our community, it was an honor, and it was part of just how we operated. We only spoke Spanish in the home. And so at the Puerto Rican Society Club, we had to build it, right? Every weekend, we would have these fundraisers. And that's what I learned what a fundraiser was. And we would put on skits, and we would put on shows to raise money to build this Puerto Rican Society of New Britain. So we started off in a rental place, and then we were able to actually cut the ribbon in an actual building that is still there today.
So I should have interviewed your father.
He passed away 7 years ago now at the age of 94. And my mother passed away over 25 years ago, too early. She suffered, she had diabetes, and then there was complications as a result of going on dialysis, like with many Latinos. We didn't catch it until she was in her 50s. And so by the time we were able to concentrate on changing the diet, which is a big part of what needs to happen with diabetics, that, it was very difficult. And in fact, not a lot of information available in Spanish, because she was still not, being illiterate, which I didn't even understand what that was until later on, to have materials about, how to take care of yourself and if you're a diabetic. So anyway, my mother was a madre ejemplar. We were in the church, St. Mary's Church. I was in the girls' choir. We had the Spanish Mass, which was in the basement of St. Mary's Church. And it was always, packed. So we were very ingrained in the Puerto Rican community of New Britain. And at that time, the other towns in Connecticut that had high concentrations of Puerto Ricans, we all communicated. We would go to Meriden, Waterbury, Wallingford, New London, Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, of course. And there was a lot more connection during that time with celebrating the Puerto Rican culture. So we had a statewide parade at the time. The Puerto Rican parade was a statewide parade. You had your local activities going on, and then that changed a little bit later on, and I believe it's coming back, which is absolutely wonderful. But my experience growing up in Connecticut was absolutely living in two worlds, my Puerto Rican world and my American world, and I'm very proud of both.
This is a really important issue that you're raising, because in the case of a lot of Puerto Ricans, both in Connecticut and in Puerto Rico, once they achieve a degree of success or work, they sort of migrate out. Can you tell me a little bit about, you're still here in Connecticut.
Absolutely.
What are your connections to home after this wonderful upbringing?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, the first time I went to Puerto Rico was when I was 21. I went with my mother, and it was her first time going back in over, 40 years. I met my uncles for the first time. And so my mother was 4'11". My father was 6 feet. And I have two sisters that are on the shorter side, and then my brother and I are on the taller side. My grandmother was 6 feet also, which was very unusual. And when we went to Puerto Rico, I met my family for the first time, and the brothers. They were all very short on my mother's side. And so me being so tall, there's actually a photo of us where I have two uncles on each side of me with my arms around them. And it looks like little coconuts coming out of my arms here. But it was the first time that I met my family there. They were actually surprised that I was able to speak Spanish. Pero ¿dónde tú eres? ¿Tú eres de allá? No, ¿cómo va a ser? So it was one of those things that I just realized what a gift my parents had given me, that we only spoke Spanish in the home. So for me, I did move away from Connecticut on several occasions. It was later on in my life, in my early 30s, late 20s, actually, I moved to Boston. I lived in Boston for a few years. I lived in New York for a few years. I went to Puerto Rico and lived in Puerto Rico for 1 year. But this is my roots. Connecticut is my roots. This is my family. This is my network. This is where I feel that I have been, given the opportunities that have opened up for me to not just get an education. I went to UConn in stores. It was during affirmative action that came around. And, let's keep in mind that my parents didn't have an education, but my mother knew the importance of an education. And so for me, growing up, it was very easy to kind of pull the wool over their eyes to say, that I did my homework, because they didn't really know what that meant. So my mother would say, Marilyn, ¿tú hiciste el homework? She knew that word, homework. And that was probably the most that she knew about what it was, going on in schools. And I would say, sí, mami, ya yo lo hice en la escuela. As a result of that, I ended up in the bottom quarter of my class because I really didn't have that guidance. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the teachers that were giving me any kind of hope. In fact, they would say, oh, Marilyn, you're just not smart enough. They actually used that language. Or, when I was in my second grade, her name was Mrs. McHale. And I just remember it vividly when she told me, Marilyn, you're stupid. You're just plain stupid. And so what happens with that, Charles, is that we internalize that. And we believe that we are not smart enough, we're not stupid, so then we don't have that kind of ambition to try, or just because, we're not going to be able to do that. So when I got to high school and an affirmative action came around, it was 1971. And I remember the recruiters that came from UConn, Fernando Milan and Alma Maldonado. And I don't know if they're still out there, but I want to thank them. They interviewed Black and Puerto Rican students from across the state of Connecticut in the inner city schools. And New Britain was considered, we were definitely in the inner city. And of that, they selected 4 students from each school, 2 Puerto Rican and 2 Black. And I was selected as one of the Puerto Rican students. And it was because they had a conversation with me. They talked to me. And my experience growing up in New Britain and building the Puerto Rican Society of New Britain and being involved in the community, I had a lot to say. So I was recruited. I entered UConn stores that fall as a regular student. And I ended up on the dean's list the very first year. And so they kind of scratched their heads and said, how does a kid from inner city, from bottom quarter of her class, get to a school like UConn and make the dean's list? So it demonstrated, some people started to think a little bit differently about, the potential and the Pygmalion effect, basically. So that is really, one of the things that kept me rooted in Connecticut. The fact that I went to stores. When I left stores, I landed in Hartford, the big city, Hartford, Connecticut. And that's where I met women. These are the women, I stand on the shoulders of these women because they were the ones that I saw so actively involved in the community involvement, civic engagement, that I was fascinated. Maria Sanchez, in her bata, marching up to the state capitol, demanding the rights of Puerto Ricans and really making change happen, becoming a state representative. She had a little tiny store on the beginning of Albany Avenue, La Bodega, and that is where everything happened. La Bodega is where you had your meetings. And so, and then there was Edna Negron. She was Edna Negron Smith. And she was a fascinating Taína woman, and she's still around. I'm trying to reach her, in fact, because I want to invite her to the Latinas in Power Symposium and recognize her and give her one of our awards. So I'm looking for that connection out there. And she was the principal of one of the schools in Hartford called Betances. And she was the first principal of an inner city school to bring a healthcare clinic into the school in the United States, the first. So, and then there was Doris Roldan, who was very involved in organizing the women organizations, and I cut my teeth on watching these people. So, I had a lot of women that I was able to look up to say, wow, I feel it. I feel that's what I need to be doing. And since, I grew up doing it, I got very involved in the Hartford community. I worked here for a number of years before I moved on to spread my wings to go to Boston and to New York and to other places before I came back here to start my family. And I lived in New York, in Manhattan. I was working for TWA at the time. And I knew that I wasn't going to raise a family in New York. I knew that I was going to raise my family in Connecticut because this is in my heart. This is where I belong. So, and I'm glad that I came back, and I've been back ever since. I was 35 years old. I started my family, and I've been here ever since.
So you work with Latina women. In some ways, you're empowering them. We know that Latina women in the state and nationwide face a number of challenges, discrimination, so on and so forth. What other issues, or what issues were key or have been key for you to address as a Puerto Rican woman, as a Latina woman here in the state?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's been an evolution of challenges and barriers that have taken place. And so for me, my first time becoming a part of a women Latina organization was with an organization that started in the late 70s called NACOPRO, the National Conference of Puerto Rican Women. And that's where I met this woman named Noemi Santana. And Noemi Santana was the president of that. It was a national chapter. It was a national organization. I was fascinated with Noemi. This was the first time that I saw a Puerto Rican woman on a big stage with hundreds of Latinas in the audience speak so eloquently, so beautifully in both languages. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I mean, I was inspired by that. I immediately came back to my town in New Britain, and we started a chapter, the NACOPRO chapter of New Britain. We won chapter of the year. I mean, there was all kinds of wonderful stuff, but that's really was my first experience in understanding the impact of bringing Latinas together in a spirit of camaraderie, in a spirit of comadreship, and in a way that we were really supporting each other. And so that was the most important thing at that time, that we were not alone, that we realized that there were other women that came from similar backgrounds that also wanted to, get ahead and to achieve success. And we realized that doing that and having a voice was going to be one of the first things. Of course, we were facing racism, discrimination, sexism, Asia, just like all other women, but at a deeper level. Because especially for Puerto Ricans, if you look at the hierarchy of women in this country, Puerto Ricans were always at the bottom of that hierarchy. And so we wanted to change that. We wanted to change, first of all, the image of Puerto Rican women, that often the image was not very favorable, that we were categorized into, on welfare and pregnant and this and that. And yet here we are with this, incredible group of women that were achieving all kinds of wonderful success. And we wanted to tell that story. And so we began to do that and making sure that we were documenting a lot of that. So a lot of that history is still very much alive. Throughout the years, as I climbed the corporate ladder and got my opportunities to reach levels of management and leadership in Fortune 100 companies, I looked around and I often saw that I was the only Latina at the table, and often overlooked on promotions, on, you just didn't feel like you belonged, and they let you know that you didn't belong as well. And so, and really, I looked around and I had no trusted champions. I had no mentors in that corporate environment that had similar backgrounds coming from inner city like I did. And so perhaps I was not corporately polished as they are. Perhaps I didn't have the kind of character and personality that is reserved, corporate reserved, that my Latina-ness was a little bit too much. Yes, we like to use our hands. Yes, we like to hug you. Yes, we like to do all of that. And there is definitely an adjustment that you have to code switch, is what they call today, where you have to behave a certain way in a corporate environment, a certain way, in your community. And, we had to really be able to do that in order to reach any level of success in a corporate environment. So what happened one year, about 23 years ago, I was working for a large corporation. I was at a director level. I had ambitions to reach a vice president, senior vice president. So that was my goal. I kept getting overlooked. And it really had a lot to do with not really understanding how to maneuver the waters in a corporate environment. And so what I did is there were several Latinas like myself in the Hartford area working for other insurance companies. There was Travelers and Cigna and Phoenix and some of the healthcare. And we would get together and just talk about, hey, how did you handle that situation in that team meeting when someone made a derogatory remark about Puerto Ricans? Did you have your hood come out and say, this is what we're going to do? Or did you have a different communication style? And so we shared ideas with each other, strategies for communication with each other. And it was so helpful, Charles. It was so powerful that one day we looked around and went, we got to bring more Latinas into this. And that is when they looked at me, the organizer. I loved putting things together. It was just part of my personality. And they said, Marilyn, if you do something, we will support you. Our companies will support you. And so I said, okay. And I'm in the marketing world now. So I created the name Latinas and Power intentionally because I wanted that name Latina to be in the title of what this network was going to be. As a Latina, I wanted folks to let them know we have arrived. We're ready to do business. And we're ready for us to be viewed as not, to be seen and not invisible and not taken off the shelf when it's Hispanic Heritage Month or when it's Women's History Month that, we have a Latina in the house. We could, ask Marilyn to represent us. And then the rest of the time, we are invisible. And so we wanted to change that image of Latinas that we have arrived and that we are professionals and that we're ready to do business. And the word power, to talk about power and the power shift and how important it is that we discuss power as a way of making sure that we know how to get it, we know what to do when we get it, we know how to pass it on to others. Because el quítate tú pa ponerme yo does not work. We must collaborate as women together and support each other. And so, when you talk about power, people get a little afraid. Latinas and power. And in fact, in the beginning, many companies had said, are you sure you want to give that name Latinas and Power? And maybe it's Latinas and Leadership. They were trying to soften it up. And I said, no, it's Latinas and Power. And so the name was established. The very first conference that I put together in 2003, 186 women showed up, word of mouth. It was on the street. Like, Marilyn's putting that thing together. There's other women involved. We're going. And at the end of that, they said to me and to the other Latinas, please don't stop. We need this. We don't have anything like this. And it's surprising. But here in Connecticut, people, when I traveled around the country, they go, there's Puerto Ricans in Connecticut. And I want to say, you know what? Yeah, there's 500,000 Puerto Ricans, Latinos in Connecticut. And Puerto Ricans make up the majority of that at 60 or 65%, whatever it is today. And so, we made an impact and companies started to pay attention. Fast forward 20 years, and now 21 years, many companies are on board to support this initiative. It is used as a professional development platform. They send their employees as a professional development experience. And about 4 or 5 years ago, it was so powerful. It would sell out every year at 500 Latinas. I was still working my corporate job. So this was my pay it forward now. About 4 or 5 years ago, companies and Latinas said, Marilyn, we love what you're doing, but we want more. What can we do? What can you do? So I was heading into retirement. I just retired from the corporate arena 3 years ago. And I knew that this is my purpose in life. This was what I wake up in the morning, and what excites me the most is to share what I have learned with other women, with other Latinas, to help them, because I know that there's a lot of more Marilyns behind me. Putting that ladder down is critical for each and every one of us. That once we have reached a certain level of success, that once we have a certain amount of influence, that we open those doors and we share that influence with others. That is what I believe. And that is what many of the people in my circle and my life believe. And that is why it's working so beautifully. And so now, 21 years later, so 3 years ago, we became a 501c3, because I knew that if I was going to add programmatic initiatives, we needed financial funding and support for this. It couldn't be just a conference where companies sponsor the event. Y ya se acabó la cosa, next. It had to have ongoing engagement. And so I put pen to paper, and again, I created the idea, well, if we're going to do something that is substantial, then let us create an institute. I had the audacity to think that I could stand up an institute. And that is exactly what I ended up doing. I named it Latinas in Leadership Institute, or Lili, because, Latinos, we like to give those acronyms, Lulu and Lala and Lili. So ours is Lili, and got our first grant. And what I did with the first grant was to understand what Latinas' challenges were today. Because just because those are the same challenges I had does not mean that the same things are happening. Lo and behold, the same things are happening. So when you compare the research that we did, we published a report called The Latina Pathway to Excellence in a Post-Pandemic World. I brought you a hard copy of it. It's in English and in Spanish on my website, so anybody can download it. But basically what that said is we haven't moved the needle very much, not just for Latinas, for the entire Latino community, that we are still facing many of the same obstacles. And a lot of them has to do with the fact that others are making decisions for our community. And so it is time for us to make sure that we have a voice, that we are represented, because representation is key. But you can't have representation unless you have a pool that you could pull from. So that means we have to start building the kind of skills that are needed for leadership and advocacy in our community, meaning civic engagement, meaning making sure that we can articulate the issues, that we have that voice to express, here's what's going on. We are dealing with, housing issues. We are dealing with food insecurity issues. We are dealing with lack of access to opportunities, to education. None of that has changed. We are still dealing with it. We may have had a little bit of success in that you have people like myself and yourself that are out here that have had the opportunity to obtain an education and have had an opportunity to really be able to have that 30,000 view of what needs to happen in our community in order to build the kind of capacity that is needed. So there's a few of us out here making noise, right? And it's starting to have a little bit of an impact. With my institute, I was able to raise significant funds as a nonprofit organization in grants in the very first year. I took our research and I created the curriculum for the institute. It launched in September of 2023 with 15 women successfully. Within 2 months, companies and because in our community, I mean, you know, everybody here, how was that? Was it any good? You know, and people started reaching out to me saying, hey, listen, I heard the Institute is really excellent. When is your next one? Charles, I had not thought about my next one. I was just trying to get this one off the ground, but I immediately jumped into action because fortunately we did have the infrastructure in place to be able to scale quickly. I knew scaling was going to be an important part of this. So we launched our second cohort 2 weeks ago with 16 more women. We are opening the doors for cohort 3 in September for another 16 women. We're building a little army of Latinas that have the skills to be able to not just elevate themselves in their career and in their business, but to understand civic engagement and advocacy in a way that they're going to be able to contribute. How we're doing it in the Institute is that we have created as part of the experience a capstone project. That capstone project is to write a report, a policy brief, a presentation on issues that are impacting the Latino community. We have selected 5 categories that we're focusing on right now. Health equity, of course, and our focus right now is on mental wellness in the Latina community. Disparities in education. The first group talked about the transition from high school to college and how we are losing so many of these students and why. Wealth management, financial literacy, and the unrealized power of the Latino voter. We are in a year that is, a turning point for democracy. If we do not help people understand how their voice matters, how they must play a role in saving the future of our state, of our country, then, it is one of the things that we will look back on and say, why didn't we do something? Why did we stand on the sidelines and not do anything? I don't believe in that. I'm not standing on the sidelines. And that's why the civic engagement component to finishing this 6-month program is at the centerpiece of what we feel will have a big impact.
Let me ask you, what about other organizations? When you think about the landscape, you're doing this incredible work here. What other organizations are addressing the needs of Puerto Ricans in the world that you're living in, which is not just New Britain, but it's Hartford, it's Connecticut in general?
Well, I have, fortunately, almost every position that I had when I worked in the corporate world was at on the national stage. So I was usually the face of the company, the head of the Latino market or whatever it is. So I traveled extensively throughout the United States representing, whatever company that I was with, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, other women's organizations. So nationally, there are many organizations, more and more now, that are bubbling up to address social justice issues. Whereas in the past, it had more to do with connecting with each other. And, it was more, there wasn't that deep understanding of how we can make a difference. And so nationally, there's several organizations and I'm connected with it. Here in the state of Connecticut, we have some great organizations. Organizations like Hispanic Health Council that has done an absolutely tremendous job. Down in New Haven, we have Prue that is making sure that our culture is alive and that we're passing on that information to our younger generations. We have representation in New London, Willimantic, Waterbury, Madres Latinas that is doing a super job over there, SCOW in Wallingford, Spanish Community Organization of Wallingford, up in Danbury, that where the representation of Latinos is so diverse. I think it's something like 30 or 40 different Latino countries that are represented in Danbury. And then, of course, in the Hartford area, where there are other organizations. In terms of women's organizations, there are a few, and I love the fact that so many women want to bring women together. We do see a lot of that. We see businesses like Latin Financial that is very involved in the community and is demonstrating as an entrepreneur that her responsibility is to give back to the community, to support the community. We have quite a number of businesses like that. I think what is lacking is that we're still all operating in a silo. Mm-hmm. And so that is one of the things that I would love to see, where we build a collaboration of the kind of work that we are doing to support each other. It boggles my mind sometimes when I go to a place like New Haven and they've never heard of Latinas in Power. And so, but we have representation from across the state. Latinas in Power representation, by the way, our annual conference is usually at the end of May, beginning of June of every year. It's coming up on May 30th. You'll be attending, hopefully. It's already close to sold out. There is a hunger. There is a thirst. There is a need for representation. There is a need for us to be able to work and see how these gatherings make a difference. But the question is, and then what? And so what are we doing with this wonderful energy that is that we are building? What is that next step? I would love to be a part of it. CICD, the group here in Hartford, bless them, for the work that they have done. And in many ways, it's not seen. It's not really seen as gratitude. There's not a lot of gratitude that goes along. I think in the Latino community, and especially the Puerto Rican community, we need to have discipline. We need to look at discipline. We need to have conversations about discipline, and to be in service to ourselves of making sure we understand what it means when you're out here working together to promote the community, to make sure that we have access, to make sure that we're addressing the issues and that the legislature understands what needs to happen, that we're doing it in a way where we're respecting each other's contributions, that we respect each other's time, that we show up for meetings, that we don't blow off meetings. Like, we'd have to have those kind of conversations in order for us to be able to move the needle.
Let me ask you, something like that, along those lines. Why do Puerto Ricans come to Connecticut? I mean, we have these challenges, we have these initiatives, but why are they coming to Connecticut?
Yeah.
And I say that because Connecticut has the highest concentration of Puerto Ricans in the nation, proportionally. Mm-hmm. It's a state with the 6th largest population. Mm-hmm. Compared to Florida, it's fairly small, but it's still the 6th state out of 50 state.
Yeah.
And people are still arriving here.
Yeah. Well, I think it has to do with the roots and the family that have been here for so many decades now. Puerto Ricans started coming to Connecticut because of tobacco and because of, some of the other agricultural needs that the state had. So they were recruiting, the United States, Connecticut was recruiting directly from Puerto Rico for those communities to get here. So once you establish a presence here and you have primos and tias y los abuelos and everybody is here, that it's a natural transition for Puerto Ricans to come here first and then, disperse to other parts of the state. But primarily, it's a cold state. So I was born and raised here, so, I am used to it. But I think it's the fact that there's so many, the families that are established here have deep roots. And, it is a beautiful place to live. I think my father first went to the Bronx in 1950 to see if that's where he was going to bring his family. And he goes, ¿Qué? No, ¿qué va? And he decided, that Connecticut. So he heard about somebody that had a job, and then he came here and established. And even then, in the early days, they wouldn't even rent an apartment to him. They don't rent to Puerto Ricans. It was the same thing that was happening throughout the country in terms of racism and discrimination. It took him 2 years to find an apartment in Meriden where he could bring my mother from Puerto Rico and my 2 older sisters, Yvonne and Diane. So there's four of us. We're very, very close. All of us, my sisters, very successful. My older sister, Yvonne, has done tremendous work in the area of organizational development and DEI work. My sister Diane was a journalist. She was the president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. All 3 of us have really achieved some very interesting accomplishments. In fact, in the community, because we did so much in the community, there were 3 of us, and people thought there was 30 of us. They were like, how many Alverios are you out here? But our work has really been recognized. About 5 or 6 years ago, I think it was 2016, we were the first Latino family to be inducted into the National Immigrant Hall of Fame based out of Connecticut. And at first, when they approached us and said they wanted to recognize the Alverio family for everything that they have done, and I said, but we're not immigrants. We migrate back and forth from Puerto Rico. And what they said was very interesting, which is why we went along with it, is because they said, yes, but you have the immigrant experience. Even though Puerto Ricans are not immigrants, it's the same experience. Mm-hmm. And what you have done to open the door for other immigrants is what we want to celebrate in our family. So we were honored to receive that. My family has received a lot of awards and and recognition. I recently was selected as one of the remarkable women in Connecticut from Channel 8. And they did a story on me and came to my house, and I was able to pull out my family pictures and show, el orgullo que yo tengo para mi familia y la comunidad.
Let me talk to you a little bit about civic engagement in community mentors and influences. You mentioned some along the line, but you've become a mentor for a lot of people. What's that next generation? What are you people who are working with you, who are learning from you? How are they getting involved in the community? Can you give me a couple examples?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, through this Leadership Institute that we just stood up, and we're going into our 3rd group, and these capstone projects, one of the things that we hope will be an outcome of those reports is that we get more eyeballs on the issues. I'm not saying that these capstone projects are discovering anything new. Everybody knows what is going on and what our challenges are, and how our community is suffering. And so we just want to talk more about it to make sure that it may be a hit on social media, it may be a hit on Good Morning America. All of a sudden, that the timing, you're there, and somebody says, "Oh, look what's going on in Connecticut. And somebody just wrote a report." We're publishing these reports through a publicity company. And so we hope that through that, we can bring more young people into the fold. The Institute, we are targeting early career women. And so we have several women that are in their late 20s. And I think what's interesting is that generational mindset that is different from the old guard and from, other generations. So it is really important that we, make sure that we are having conversations with our young people, that we are sharing our history, such as this, with our young people so that they understand why it is important. We do not want to have our culture erased, as many other cultures have been erased in this country. Puerto Ricans have this uncanny way of showing up everywhere. We are everywhere. Every state in the United States, Hawaii, everywhere else. And it's just fascinating to me because of, the history of oppression and the history of colonization of trying to, wipe out our culture and history, yet it doesn't happen. So why? What is it about Puerto Ricans that we have been able to survive and that we have been able to continue our language, our culture, our music, our food, everything? And so that in itself must be shared with younger generations. There's this thing called retro-acculturation that is happening right now with young Latinos. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Tell me more.
Okay. So retro-acculturation is when people are going back to their roots to understand their culture, their language in a very different way. So we call it retro-acculturation, right? Because we're growing up in the United States. I'm a second generation only because my mother, I swear I could have been conceived in Puerto Rico. There's a possibility. My sister says you're dreaming. No, I'm going to claim it anyway, because who's going to prove me wrong? Both my parents have passed away. So anyway, but I think that the retro-acculturation piece is happening with a lot of our young people right now. And so we want to take advantage of that and have educational opportunities available for them in the way that they want to receive it, not in the way that we want to present it to them. So we must understand better through surveys, through focus groups or whatever, how young people want to learn about our culture. And sharing that culture with them, because they're ready. They're really starting to, look back and say, oh, I'm Latino, because being Latino today is a good thing. It wasn't always a good thing. I remember growing up in New Britain when, some folks would say from the Anglo community, oh, you dirty Puerto Rican, go back to where you came from. And I wanted to say to them, you want me to go back to Meriden? Because Meriden's right next door. That's where I came from. And so there was still that, idea and image of Puerto Ricans being, not good. And so all of a sudden, Latinos are, in a position where, we have political muscle. We're not using it. We have, the attention is on us. We have economic power. You saw the I don't need to share with you the numbers of Latinas that are just surpassing every single index that is out there about starting new businesses. So we are in the position right now to make sure we capitalize that and share it with a younger generation so that they will continue this journey, because we're not going to be here forever.
Let me ask you, this is really important because you're in a unique position that I haven't seen with other community leaders. And I'll ask you two related questions.
Okay.
The first one is, when you're thinking about a generational change. So in the 70s, we thought about activism differently than we thought about activism today. Can you tell me a little bit more how your personal journey has been informed by those changing historical moments? And how have you thought about either modifying or changing? And then I'm going to ask you the second question, because you're answering all my questions before I can ask. So, but these are two interrelated. One of the problems that we have in the community right now is that there are a lot of leaders like yourself. There's a generation of leaders that have done everything. And we're no longer having those younger generations of leaders that are doing everything. So, for example, we invited a number of people today, and everyone's telling me, well, I have this activity with the Borinqueneers, and I have to go to the library, and they're doing like 10 different activities. But we're not seeing a generation of younger Puerto Ricans sort of filling those shoes, and these community leaders are starting to retire. And I say this because you're in a unique position where you're actually training newer generations. So can you tell me a little bit more about the relationship between that training of new generations and the changing landscape of activism or civic engagement since the 70s or before?
Right. And when I was growing up and getting involved in the community, there were many organizations like the Young Lords that were much more militant. independentistas that were, much more rebellious. And I did not get involved in either of them. First, because my parents didn't let me, because I probably would have. But those were all militant organizations in the beginning that were trying to make change happen in our community. And that evolution that has changed as a result of, many of them either, going to jail and, spending the rest of their life in jail and everything else that happened in that part of our history. And I think as we get educated through the education system, so, I have a 4-year college degree, I have a master's degree, and I have had to learn how to communicate differently as a result of that. I think that evolution of people like myself and yourself that is able to sit down calmly, objectively, and decisively to find teachable moments for us to be able to kind of maybe challenge the status quo a little bit and or have conversations with people. For example, I hear a lot, "Oh, Marilyn, you're the exception and not the rule. You don't even have an accent." The idea that some people think that is a compliment is beyond me. And I make that a teachable moment to let them know it's not a compliment. I explain to them, a little bit more about, from a historical standpoint of, it was 500 years of slavery. Okay. We're less than 50 years in terms of leveling the playing field. And so start to think about that. When we saw reports in the late 80s about how the workforce is changing, right? They sound the alarm to say the workforce is changing, the browning of America. There was a report called Workforce 2000 by the Hudson Institute and Towers Perrin that told corporations that they needed to pay attention to who was going to be in the workplace. And that is going to be people like me. And so that was only, like 30, 40 years ago. The fact of the matter is that it's just slowly starting to change now, even though civil rights took place in the 1960s. There was a good 30 years there where really the needle wasn't moved at all. So I think that once the door opened a little bit for obtaining an education through the system, through affirmative action, of course, that you have more and more people that can articulate the issues and explain what is happening, then that is the different kind of activism that is taking place today. That people are writing books about it. Like we have so many Latina authors. You have people like Esmeralda Santiago and so many others. Juana Bordas, who is talking about Latino leadership in this country and helping people understand what it is you need to do and making sure that we don't leave our Latinaness, our Latino-ness at the door, that we show up authentically and that we integrate that into how we lead and how we advocate. And so I think the way that activism has changed is that we're no longer afraid of, that we have an accent or that we may talk to, with our hands, or that we may talk too loud, or that, wearing hoop earrings is okay. All of these things are changing today because we are looking at ourselves as in terms of our identity as an asset.
Well, let me tease that a little bit here in Connecticut. So you have a major migration of Puerto Ricans in the 50s. And there's this effort, as you sort of alluded to, of sort of having their own stores, their own companies, their own businesses. The second generation seems to be more interested in education, not necessarily means starting a business 7 days a week alone, or 1 or 2 people. And then there's a push to elect more Puerto Rican politicians, and then there's a change. So you have this gradual integration where generationally there's been a sort of shift in some ways, where activism in the 70s doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as activism in 2000, because you now have 17 Latino politicians, whereas in 1970 you barely had one, Maria Sanchez. I mean, how do you see the training of a new generation of leaders who may not necessarily have experienced this, or is not necessarily aware of that change in landscape?
That's such a good question. I think it's because we are paying a lot more attention to who we call leaders. Mm-hmm. We are paying a lot more attention to who we vote for that runs for office. Just because you have a last name that is Latino does not mean that you are the right candidate. We're paying a lot more attention. In the beginning, it was like, just get any Latino in there. And now it's more like, let's learn a little bit more about them. What have they done? What is their agenda? We're paying a lot more attention to that, I believe. And so, that is the mindset that you see shifting from, kind of desperation to just get a voice out there to getting the right person in there. I think that's why, the number of Latino representatives through the Hispanic caucus is at 17. We're at 17. Like, imagine that, we had 1 to 17. And, and I think that they're doing a good job. I think that they need support. I believe that it is our responsibility, everybody that can communicate in a way and communicate anyway, whether, it's verbally or whether it's in any other way, to step up and to provide those legislators with support so that we can continue to see bills passed that are going to help our community. So there has to be a better relationship with that community. However, we are still dealing with the mindset of why Puerto Ricans are not voting here in the state of Connecticut. And so we need to address that. We know that in Puerto Rico, I believe it's a holiday to vote. I mean, so one of the recommendations that we have in one of our reports is, how do we make it a holiday in Connecticut to vote? I mean, this is something that is absolutely possible because of, the restrictions that many Puerto Rican families have. They have to work sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, and they have the kids and everything else. And then there's the excuses. ¿Para qué voy a votar? Que nada cambia. Eso para lo político para allá. Like all these excuses that they're holding on to. How do we help change mindsets? How do we communicate with them that we are at a critical juncture, that you are about to face some possible issues where you're not going to be able to provide for your family? Like, we have to put a scare into our community to say everything could be lost if you don't get involved, and in a way where people will begin to participate. So I think coming up with ways to get people to participate more. It can't be the same 5 people representing us all the time. Mm-hmm. You just talked about some of the other interviews that you had, and that this person needed to go to the Buccaneers meeting and this meeting. I don't do that. My style is that I don't dilute my time. I select 3 things that I'm going to work on, and that's where I stay. Am I asked to be on boards? All the time. Am I, all of this? I need to stay focused on how and where I can have an impact and put my energy and my resources into those things. If we can start to help our community understand, to not say yes to everybody who invites you to be on a committee, on a board, on a this or that, and, burning out and doing that for so long that you don't have effect on one specific thing. So I think that there's a process here that we need to start talking more about, where if we could help people understand, look, just take your top 3. I always work in 3s. I do 3 things every day. What's your top 3? What is your 3? My 3 every day may involve something that is a self-care. It definitely has something to do with the business or running the organization, and it's something to do with making sure that my finances are in order and that my house is in order. So paying attention to these things, how do we help people understand that that is going to have a higher impact on anything that you do? I'm not sure I have the answer to that, but I think it's one of the things that we need to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This has been wonderful. Am I missing something that you would like to communicate about thinking about leadership and community engagements?
Yeah. Oh, there's so many things. I think that, first of all, the work that you're doing with this project is critical because we have been operating in silos. I would love for something to come out of this project, which is things like creating a central database of everyone and what everybody is doing. That is going to be very helpful. I think that an initiative to how do we get young people involved and engaged in, understanding what it means to be involved in the community. A serious initiative, like maybe it's something that needs to get subsidized with our youth throughout the state of Connecticut. But let us come up with a real strategy that has long-term impact, that has succession planning involved in it so that when we go away, that all of our work still lives and continues. One of the things I'm doing with Latinas in Power now is creating a succession plan because I'm not going to be around forever. Everybody knows if I graduated in high school in 1971, that means I'm 70 years old. And so how much time do I have left? You can't bottle it and pass it on. You have to share what you have learned with everyone else. You must share your influence with others and open the door for others to be able to make things happen. However, we must keep in mind that there still are people that have hidden agendas, and those hidden agendas may not be in our favor. So we kind of have to have that intuition that comes up to make sure that the people in our circle that we are working with, that we trust, that we're building trust with, are people that are really in it, because we want to make sure that our culture stays alive, that Puerto Rican history is told, that the narrative comes from us. And that narrative, if it doesn't come from us and it comes from someone else, may not be, the right historical perspective of what actually happened in our communities. I think that we should recognize those that came before us. I'm looking to bring Edna Negron, because I know she's still alive out there, to Hartford to say thank you for what you have done and to demonstrate that this is something we stand on the shoulders of so many people. And how do we then continue to build that? I'd like to see something come out of this project where we actually do have a concentrated long-term strategy on how are we going to move forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.